Welcome back to these series of lectures on Western civilization, part one. We're going to take a couple of lectures and talk about the Renaissance. We should probably define the Renaissance first. It's a sort of an explosion of creative activity across the gamut of human endeavor, from science to art to governance to philosophy. It takes place 14th, 15th, 16th centuries, just general round figures for you. Renaissance, of course, means a rebirth. What are we rebirthing here? Classical culture, the notion of the classical cultures of Greece and Rome are being rebirthed here. Those conventions developed by the ancient Greeks and Romans are held in very high esteem and are going to be brought back to life, so to speak. What I want to do here in this lecture is to look at some Renaissance paintings and to demonstrate what makes them distinctly Renaissance in style, because we're going to see a change in conventions, artistic conventions. And when I say conventions, what I'm talking about is the traditional way of doing something. When you leave here and go to your car and turn on the radio, how long do the songs last? About 3 minutes. That's a convention. When you go to the theater to watch a movie, how long does the film last? Hour and a half, 2 hours? Again, a convention. The average book is about 250 pages long. That's a convention. Symphonies have 4 movements. Again, that's the traditional way of doing it. It's a convention. So what's happening here is that we're seeing a change in Renaissance or in artistic styles during what we call the Renaissance. What's happening is that we're moving away from a focus on God and the church, and we're moving more towards a focus on man. You have the emergence of humanism, focus on humanity as opposed to the deity. So what I want to do is show you this first painting. This is Cimabue's painting the Madonna and Child with 6 angels. This is a pre-Renaissance style painting. I want to show you this one first so that you can contrast it with the paintings that follow, which are much more Renaissance in style. You'll notice that there's no movement in this painting. The figures are all looking back at us. They're returning our gaze. They're not interacting with each other. There's no human emotion in this painting. The characters are rather stiff. There's no depth. There's no sense of foreground and background. You see that Mary herself is exaggerated in size. This is a clue to the viewer of who is the central figure in the painting. You see the halos. The halos designate holy figures. So this is a very clerical painting, entirely religious in its subject matter, and demonstrating those conventions of a pre-Renaissance style. Now let's go forward and look at some paintings that are going to show dramatic changes in how we do things. This is the banishment of Adam and Eve. You've probably seen this before. And you can see immediately that there are pretty dramatic differences here. Adam and Eve are being shown the door. You see the angel with the sword above the archway leading to the Garden of Eden. You'll notice first that Adam and Eve are completely nude. Renaissance-style paintings have a focus on the human body, and we can see that clearly here. You'll also notice the human emotion that we did not see in our first painting. Here, Adam and Eve are both in anguish and are weeping. Notice something else. Look at the ground behind them. You'll see shadows are being formed. Renaissance-style paintings generally have a source of light. Whether it's moonlight or sunlight or a candle or what have you, there's generally a source of light. The light here appears to be the sun at about 2 o'clock, and you can see it casting shadows on the ground. These characters are not paying any attention to us, are they? They're engulfed in their own grief as they're being expelled from the Garden of Eden. There's movement. They're walking. So we have these emerging conventions of Renaissance-style paintings, movement, emotion, a source of light, a focus on the human body. This gives us a good start. Let's go to our next one. This is one of my favorites. This is Fra Angelico's The Annunciation. And let your eyes wander over this painting for a moment. You'll see that a story is being told. First of all, let's look at the right foreground. And you'll see that Mary is doubling over in surprise and shock indeed as the Archangel Gabriel informs her that she is pregnant with God's child. You'll notice the classical architecture, the columns and arches, again, a rebirth of classical culture. You'll notice to the left in the background, and here we have depth, which is characteristic of Renaissance style paintings. You'll notice the figures of Adam and Eve fully clothed and being expelled again from the Garden of Eden. You see the angel above them showing them the way out. And you'll see the sun and a sunbeam focusing our attention on the subject of the painting, Mary, as she's doubling over in shock. Think about the story that's being told here by Fra Angelico. To the left, we have Adam and Eve being banished from the Garden of Eden, the fall of man. And then to the right, in the foreground, we have man's redemption, as Mary is informed that she is pregnant with God's child. So we have a source of light, we have movement, we have emotion, we have classical architecture, we have depth, brilliant color, beautiful example of Renaissance style paintings. This next painting is also quite famous. This is the Dream of Constantine. Constantine, the Roman emperor. We talked about him before. Constantine, of course, is the champion of Christianity. The Edict of Milan ends the persecution of the Christians in the late Roman Empire. And of course, Constantine will preside over the Council of Nicaea that we've talked about, whereby the first Bible is commissioned, among other things. So you see Constantine here the evening before his great epiphany, where he conquers in the sign of Christ. And let's take a look here. You see depth, foreground and background. You see the angel in the upper left portion of the painting, the angel pointing us, our attention, to the subject of the painting, which is Constantine there asleep in his dream. You see there's a source of light, in this case either a torch or moonlight perhaps. And you see Constantine's tent resembles a stage really, with the main actor there being exposed. You see the guards out front almost like stage hands. So this is still a very clerical style painting, or at least its subject matter is clerical, of the church. Yet it has many of these conventions that we've discussed with regard to Renaissance style paintings. Another very famous painting, this is the Baptism of Christ. You can see again, we have a source of light here. We have foreground and background, movement. The characters are interacting with each other. They're not paying any attention to us. I want you to look at the anatomical detail of these two figures. You see Christ at the center, and then to the right, you see John the Baptist. You can Google this on your own computer and take a look. The detail is quite astonishing. You can see the muscles, the tendons, the bones. We know that many Renaissance painters had cadavers brought to their studios so they could dissect them and actually see what the human body is comprised of, to learn how to paint in this sort of anatomical detail. So we see the conventions that we've discussed. You see them quite plainly here. This next painting is very interesting. It's called The Birth of the Virgin. I want you to look at this for a moment and notice that it's entirely secular in its composition. In other words, there are no holy figures here, are there? I don't see any angels. I don't see any representations of the holy at all. The only thing clerical or of the church about this painting is its title, The Birth of the Virgin. Here we have what looks like an elite, an estate, perhaps an Italian estate, a gathering of women after the birth of a child. You see the classical architecture, the frieze along the ceiling, the columns. So other than the title itself, The Birth of the Virgin, this painting is entirely secular in nature. You see depth, background, motion. The characters are not concerned with us, the audience. They're interacting among themselves. This may be the most famous of all Renaissance paintings. This is Botticelli's The Birth of Venus. Venus, of course, is the Roman goddess of love, a mythological figure from the classical era being rebirthed in front of our eyes. You see Venus emerging from the sea through the scallop shell. You'll notice she's entirely nude. This demonstrates or depicts innocence and purity. But notice that she's about to be clothed. You see the figure to the right is about to drape this shawl over Venus's body. At this point, she will become part of the material world. She will become human and overtly sexual. To the left, you see the two figures rather amorously entangled. They're actually blowing Venus to shore. Well, she will become part of humanity as opposed to this ideal of innocence. Again, you see motion, a good deal of motion in this painting, foreground and background, a source of light, concentration on the human body. A beautiful example of a Renaissance style painting. And of course, like I said earlier, Venus is of course the goddess of love in Roman mythology, adapted from the Greek, Aphrodite, goddess of love. So we have a rebirth here of a classical mythological figure. This is Michelangelo's The Touch of Life. This is the centerpiece of the famous Sistine Chapel. You can Google this again on your own computer and take a look at these panels. They're quite remarkable. Here, again, we see the characters are interacting with each other. They're not paying any attention to us. We see Adam's nude body. Again, we know that Michelangelo had cadavers brought to his studio so that he could dissect them and determine what was inside or beneath our skin. We see something else that we've talked about earlier when we talked about origin myths, and that's the idea of making something that's not human, depicting them in human terms, anthropomorphism. You see God here depicted as an elderly gentleman with long flowing silver hair and a beard. He reminds me of what was the film in the late 50s, The Ten Commandments, where Charlton Heston played Moses. He looks a little bit like that here. You'll notice that God is holding back the heavens with his other arm. So we see emotion here. We see depiction of the human anatomy that's quite remarkable in its detail. Again, this is very clerical, is it not? The touch of life, the creation of humanity. Yet we see the Renaissance artistic conventions quite plainly in this famous painting. And then the last one, this is the allegory with Venus, Cupid, and time. I remember the first time I saw this, I was shocked at sort of the overt sexuality involved here, almost pornography. But if you look closer and look into this painting, into the various analysis of this painting, you'll see that there's a message here. First of all, we have a source of light. We have a couple of mythological figures. Venus, again, the goddess of love. You see she's holding the apple that she was awarded as the world's most beautiful woman. Venus is center stage here and completely nude. You'll also notice that her son, Cupid, and you guys have probably heard of Cupid. You know, he's the one that shoots the arrow into you, which causes you to fall in love. So it's no accident that Cupid is the son of the goddess of love, Venus. At first glance, it would appear that something very improper, indeed incestuous, is going on here, as mother and son are engaged in a very amorous embrace. But look closer. Look beneath Cupid's right foot. You see the dove? The dove, of course, is a symbol of fidelity. And fidelity is being crushed here, is it not, by Cupid's foot? Look to the left of Cupid's back. You see the figure here in anguish, pulling at her hair in a deep cry. This is a syphilitic figure, someone who has contracted syphilis from their unrestrained sexual activity. You see the cherub to the right throwing rose petals at Venus, but just behind the cherub you see another female figure offering a honeycomb with one hand, but look behind her back. Here we have a hornet's nest. Here the temptation of something sweet may be followed by the punishment of something that stings. And then at the top right we see Father Time himself as he pulls the canvas back, exposing this unrestrained and reckless sexual behavior. So this is almost like a public service announcement, isn't it? To be restrained in your sexual activity, or there are terrible consequences to follow. So these Renaissance artistic conventions allow us to track this movement from a clerical world, a world based around God and the church, to a more humanistic world, a world based around man. You also see the conventions, the source of light, movement, emotion, focus on the human body, characters who interact with each other instead of the audience. So I'm going to stop here for this Renaissance lecture, the first of two, and we'll pick this up again when we return. Thank you.